Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and the first thing Jews wish for each other is health. The Jewish tradition, the Jewish people are all about health and life. The transcending Jewish value is pikuach nefesh, saving, protecting life. So much so that our sages teach every other Jewish law is set aside, suspended, in order to save life. That includes Shabbat, it includes the fast on Yom Kippur. Every Jewish mitzvah is secondary to life. It's how Jews toast one another, l'chaim, to life. It's also why Maimonides teaches that it's essential that every Jewish community establish a hospital as one of the first institutions of their community. And of course, it's why those who care for the ill are considered to be doing the work of heaven. In Jewish prayer, the rabbis teach that when it describes God as healer, a rofeh, it's talking about God's healing through the work of medical professionals, which is why the doctor is held in such high esteem in Jewish life. Jewish humor aside, it's not because of the money. It's because the doctor is doing the most important work that any human being can do on earth, sustaining life for other human beings. And it's not just the doctor. It's anyone who's part of the medical profession. It's something that's taken a long time for the American medical establishment to understand and embrace. As important as doctors are, the truth about healing, especially after a serious illness or accident, the truth is, it's the care provided by those who come after the doctor who make all the difference in the world in the healing process. Nurses are absolutely critical to the healing process. Medical counselors, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, they all are indispensable for pikuach nefesh. And while one always wants the best physician possible whenever there's an illness, one also needs and hopes for the best possible nursing care and support staff. And kol hakavod, all honor and praise to those who've dedicated their lives to healing. And that's why I'm extremely pleased to be sitting with a very special woman who's devoted her professional life to nursing and healing and writing for the sake of helping others deal with their own illness or personal tragedy and loss. It's a privilege for me to introduce to you Rabbi Kanarek, who's been in nursing since 1979 and who's in the forefront of an aspect of medicine most people know very little about, palliative care. And Robin and her husband Joe have experienced the worst pain the Jewish tradition says there can be in life, the death of a child. Robin and Joe lost their son David to leukemia when David was only 15 years old. And in memory and honor of David Kanarek, Robin and Joe have founded the Kanarek Family Foundation with the mission of improving the quality of life for those facing life-threatening diseases. And in 2017, Robin and Joe opened the Kanarek Center for Palliative Care Nursing, which is housed at the new Egan School of Nursing at Fairfield University in Connecticut. And I'm proud to say that Robin is a dear friend and one of the loveliest human beings you could ever meet. It is so wonderful, Robin, to have you at this table.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very, very much.
I'm honored.
And it's a kick for me, so thank you.
Thank you.
So there's so much I want to talk to you about professionally and personally. I want to first understand you Jewishly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want you to explain to the audience. You grew up where?
I grew up in your hometown of Stamford, Connecticut, and from third to sixth grade,
Yes.
I attended bicultural day school in Stamford.
What was that like?
It was wonderful. It was very small. It was very intimate. I was not a great student, I will admit, but I sure enjoyed the teachers and had wonderful teachers. And I loved the tradition, all the tradition they taught us. There was a lot of other Hebrew education.
Was Hebrew easy for you?
Not at that point. As I got older, I think, when I married Joe.
Okay, who is an Israeli?
Who lived in Israel,
Yes.
yes.
And what kind of Jewish home did you have? What did you grow up?
I
What were you surrounded by?
I would say we were raised in a conservative home. My grandfather, when he was alive, he died in the mid-70s, he was Orthodox. And every Sunday we would visit him in Greenwich. He owned a little grocery store on Steamboat Road. And we would visit him. And I remember just loved to go to the store and get the candy and all that. And it was very special memories. But my grandfather was very traditional, and my mom kept a kosher home, and the holidays were critical. It really
Do you have warm memories about the holidays?
I have very special memories.
Seder?
Seder.
Tell me about Seder at your home.
I just remember us, my brothers and I, and our cousins would all sit around the table, and someone would bring up one of the tunes, and I remember knowing all the songs, and I just needed to be reminded of what the songs were like, and we were all in competition as who would sing better, and who would do the 4 questions, and because I know it, and...
Did you do the 4 questions?
Yeah, of course I did.
Do you still remember the 4 questions?
Yeah.
Do a little bit for me.
Manishtana halayla hazeh miko halaylo.
Mitsuyan. Then you know the chant. That's wonderful. Yeah, those are wonderful memories for a child, aren't they?
I have to say that was probably the time when the family really reunited. And that to me is my most special memory.
That's lovely. That's lovely. How many brothers do you have?
I have two brothers.
Where are they in life?
Mark is retired and living in Stamford, and my younger brother is in Rochester, New York, teaching for children who have learning disabilities. He's a fine art photographer.
Good for him. Very lovely. Then you go to school. Where? College?
College, I went to several.
Did you?
I went to a lot of schools. I started off at Skidmore.
Yes.
I was planning on being an artist.
Yes.
And in my senior year of high school, I worked for a local pediatrician. And I just started working with the nurses and just doing general taking in the patients. And I just realized I really loved the medical terminology. I liked, it was a mystery to me. And so when I got accepted into Skidmore based on my artwork, and in my right before I was to go to Skidmore, I changed my major to nursing.
Wow.
And didn't tell anyone this. So had a full, I was planning on taking 2 art courses and 2 nursing courses, and when I got my schedule, it was all nursing. And they said, you are not going to have time to take any art classes. So I never got to take an art class at Skidmore. But they had one of the top nursing schools at that time.
Did you love it?
Not
yet?
Not yet. I really didn't know, what a nurse did. And so when I went to Skidmore and in my second year came to New York City, I remember saying, what is a nursing process? I don't understand. I don't understand what this is all about. So then I decided to take a year off, and I worked at Stamford Hospital as a nurse's aide. And that's when I really got to observe the nurses and what they did.
You were very wise.
And I would recommend anyone who goes into nursing to work as a nurse's aide, just to really get a sense of the scope of what nurses do.
And did that encourage you to go forward?
Yes, and then I
Yes.
decided to go back to school.
Yes, and then you knew what you were doing.
Yes, and I thrived then.
Then you thrived. And I said in the open, you became a nurse in 1979. Where? Where did you practice first?
I first practiced Stanford Hospital.
Okay.
I worked on the cardiac unit.
Ooh,
And
that's serious stuff, Robin.
yes, it was serious. It was very serious. But it was all young. They were all young nurses, and we had a very strict head nurse, a military nurse.
Yes.
The real stereotypical nurse. And you loved her and you were scared of her. But I was able to deal with it, but it was very overwhelming. In the 70s and early 80s, there was a severe nursing shortage. So I remember working night shift and being responsible for 40 patients.
That's impossible.
It was tough. It was
Yes.
tough. And some patients having blood and having cardiac arrhythmias, and I'm all by myself with an aide and an LPN doing medication. And that was it. And and I was only 21, 22 years old.
Amazing. You heard me say also in the open that it took a long time in America for nurses to be respected. And I mean respected by doctors who worked with them. When you entered nursing, what was the relationship with doctors? Were you still, unfortunately, a victim of that, or had things gotten better already?
Oh, no.
No.
No, it was, the doctor was God.
Yes.
And to call, I remember my biggest, when I worked night shift is, because you had to do night shifts, and like today you don't have to. And I remember being very overwhelmed, and I remember there were times I had to call the doctor to get validation on a situation, and some of the doctors would scream at you and verbally abuse you, disrespectful. But I think the best thing is maturity. As you grow older and you see things differently, and you start speaking your mind. And that's when I learned I have a big mouth. My husband has encouraged that.
Okay, but that's later in life.
That's
for you.
later in life, yes.
To the extent to which you know, have things changed now for the better?
Oh.
It's a different world, isn't it?
Totally. I would say the last 10, 15 years I've seen tremendous growth, and a lot of that had to do with nurses advancing their education. I remember when I would say in the 90s, nurses were encouraged, many nurses were contemplating becoming a nurse practitioner, which is advanced education after you get your bachelor's, and it's another 2 years. And those nurses were fabulous, and then there were several nurses who were going for their PhD, but then there was a shortage of nursing faculty. So they said, how are we going to deal with this? And so they developed a new program called the Doctorate Nursing Practice, and those nurses did clinical research, and it was all clinically based. And those nurses were fantastic. And I have to tell you, nursing is a totally different experience now. And there are phenomenal nurse leaders now.
And you also heard me say, and I've had my medical issues, I think nurses are critical to the healing process. And if you're lucky, and there are a lot of very wonderful nurses out there. By the way, female and male. And if you have a good nurse, it really helps the healing process. Do you understand what I mean?
I was healed by a nurse.
You end up in California. You're a nurse in California.
Yep, I moved to LA, wanted a change in environment, moved to LA, and I remember opening up the LA Times. Now, this is before the internet, so you go to the newspaper, and there were like 10 pages of nursing ads. So I could pick anything. And there was a part of me that wanted to work in Hollywood as a, as a nurse on the studio lot, but didn't get that. But I got a fabulous job in Century City on a brand new diabetes unit that was just being opened, and the doctor who started it was the president of the American Diabetes Association.
Wow.
So, and he pretty much trained us, and we were all young nurses in our 20s, all eager, and it was fabulous.
That's lovely. When you're in California, you meet the man you marry.
Yes.
How'd you meet him?
I met him, I had just moved out of my best friend's home. She had just gotten married, and she and her husband were kind enough to let me live in her home for a month, and I found a furnished apartment in Encino, California, and I was taking out the garbage because I was moving in, and the garbage bins were in the back of the parking lot because it was a garden apartment. And I go out, and there I see this gorgeous man, and he's by the garbage bin, and we say hello, and then I go back inside of my apartment to get more garbage to take out, and he's still there. And he acknowledged me, and it was wonderful, and I assumed he was Italian. He had very chiseled features, and I was always attracted to Italian men. And so he followed me, and it turned out that I later found out that I lived above him. His apartment was below me, and he spoke to a telephone operator and got my phone number and called me. And he says, "Hi, I'm Joe. We just met at the garbage." And he said, "Can I take you out?" And I said, "Well, I'm busy tonight, but why don't you come over for a cup of coffee?" So he came over for coffee, and we were sitting and talking, and it was just so easy. It was such an easy conversation. And then he acknowledged I had a chai on. And he says, "Oh, you have a chai." And I said, "How does a nice Italian boy know about a chai?" He says, "Who says I'm Italian?" He says, "I'm Jewish. I was born in Poland, lived in Israel, and now I live here." So,
How perfect.
yes, it was
How
wonderful.
perfect. How soon are you married after that?
He proposed to me after 3 months.
That's lovely.
I wasn't ready,
Good for you.
and I said I never had a relationship that lasted more than 6 months. So he proposed after 6 months, and we married a year later.
That is lovely. And how many children?
We had 2.
Yes. And that comes to, what I said, that the pain you experienced is, I don't know how any human being endures it. When do you learn that David's sick?
It was Thanksgiving morning, 1995. I was preparing Thanksgiving dinner, and all of a sudden I heard David and Sarah running the halls, and he fell. And I heard him fall, and I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What happened?" He said, "I don't know, my leg gave out." And over the course of another day or two, he started limping. And then he started experiencing hip pain, deep hip pain. And then in the 1 week, he wasn't able to walk. He had to crawl because he was in so much pain. And we had taken him to the pediatrician, and they were ruling out all the benign issues that can happen to children, and they didn't know. They didn't know what was going on.
Were you in panic?
No, not at that point. Not at that point. I just assumed that we were gonna find something, and it would be treatable. And then finally, I went to Stanford Hospital, and Harry Romanowitz, blessed memory, he was watching over David and suggested that David have a CAT scan, and a CAT scan showed that he had an enlarged spleen. And that's when the doctor said, "I think you need to go see a specialty doctor." And so I went to, I didn't know it was oncology, it was hematology and oncology. and it was up in Guilford, and that's when they did a bone marrow aspiration, and we found out that he had leukemia. Joe, unfortunately, was out of town.
You're alone when you
I'm
learned this?
alone. We had just celebrated our 14th anniversary.
Again, David at this point is?
David is
How old?
10, 11.
Okay. And do you take him to Guilford yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And are you told in Guilford by a doctor?
Mm-hmm.
The doctor comes in, is David there?
No, David was medicated, so David was sleeping. And the doctor took me aside and said, David has leukemia.
What was that moment like?
Your whole world falls apart.
Yes.
A million things are going through your head, and it's absolutely devastating. And I didn't know what the future had in store. And when the doctor came to me and I said, I can't tell David. I just can't tell David. So what we decided to do, I said to the doctor, you tell David. And I mean, this is the innocence of a child when we told him he had leukemia, and he was happy because he said, oh, at least we know now what it is. And we can go forward, and I can get treated. And he had no understanding of what cancer was at that point. And it wasn't until 2 months later that his dog, our dog, developed pancreatic cancer. And we had to put her down. And so then all of a sudden David thought, wait a minute, Becky has cancer, I have cancer, does that mean you're going to put me down?
Did he articulate it that way?
He said that. And they said, no, you're being treated, you're in remission, everything is going to be fine.
This was 2 months later?
Mm-hmm.
He was in remission within 2 months?
He was in remission within 2-3 weeks.
He was given some kind of drug therapy right away?
Mm-hmm. At Yale.
Okay. Again, you're alone in Guilford. How do you tell Joe?
I called him. He was in California, and I said, the doctor just told me that David has leukemia, and that's pretty much all I could tell him. And then the doctor got on the phone, and she didn't want to panic him, and she said, Joe, this is treatable. We are going to be able to keep this in remission. I'm very positive. I feel very strongly that we are going to be able to take care of David.
The doctors were optimistic at this point.
Very optimistic.
And they helped you be optimistic.
Not quite. I would say that first month is an
Horrible.
absolute nightmare.
Uh-huh.
I mean, because you are just trying to comprehend what's going on, and there's so much coming at you, and you're also focusing on your child. And then during that period of time, I had a very hard time separating the nurse in me and the mother in me.
Tell me.
The nurse was safe. The nurse was kind of close, but not too close. And so I kept physically wanting to do things to make him feel better.
For example?
Can I read to you, or can I give you a bed bath, or can I give you a massage? I was checking his IV all the time. I was in nurse mode.
That's the nurse. And the mommy?
The mom, that took a while. That took a little bit of time to get to, because that meant the hurt had to go viscerally. And I was, being a mom was the tough part. Mm-hmm. And David eventually articulated to me one day when I was still in nurse mode, and I was at home, and I said, what can I do to make you feel better? And he said, I just want to be a family. And that was the turning point for me.
We're going to come back to this.
Mm-hmm.
So David does go into remission.
Yes.
When he goes into remission, do you relax?
No. No, I think you're constantly aware of things that can go wrong. He had a Boviac put into his chest to give the chemotherapy, and that was attached to his heart. And so I had to be careful that kids didn't hit him. I was concerned with him going back to school, how the children were going to respond to him losing hair. He was nauseous from the chemotherapy. And so I felt, and there was really no one to educate the school faculty, so that was something I decided to do on my own. So I went to the class with David, and I had them prepare questions to David as to what they wanted to know.
The students.
The students, and this is 5th grade.
Do you remember this?
Oh, I have a video of it.
Do you?
Yes.
What are some of the questions?
How are you? How do you feel? And he would say, I have good days and bad days. I have good moods and bad moods. And one of the children asked, are you going to die? And David said, I'm very lucky because in this day and age, most children who have this type of leukemia are cured.
David says this.
Yes.
What grade are we in here?
5th grade.
Isn't that remarkable for a 5th grader to be able to articulate? That's a very mature...
He was an incredibly bright young man.
Yes. Yes, you had a very unusual son. So he says to the class, I'm going to be one of the lucky ones.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets better and better, does he not?
Yes. He was on a 2-year protocol. So the first couple of months, we had to go to Guilford every day. And the school was able to adapt to his needs. And then eventually, we were able to go like once a week. And David, I could see David was getting weaker from the chemo. He was having, he was on a lot of steroids, so he was having some temper tantrums and anger, frustration. And most of that was channeled to our daughter. And I don't know what it is. Sarah was 5 years old at the time, and she was just such a sweet kid. He would just yell at her and scream at her, and it just went in one ear and out the other. She never took it personally. And they had a very strong relationship because of it.
And now again, where are you during this period of time? How are you feeling? How are you and Joe coping with this? First of all, does it create any kind of tension between the two of you?
No, no.
It does in some families.
Yes, but we were able to talk about it, and we went to counseling, and that helped. And I mean, I think we both immersed ourselves in our work, because when David was at school, I was working at Stanford Hospital. At that point, I was working as a diabetes educator in the clinic. And I worked part-time, and Joe did a lot of traveling, and we did the best we could.
Okay. Then what happens?
Then David had his bar mitzvah, which I have to say was probably the happiest day of my life, other than my getting married to Joe.
What was that like?
It was a dream come true. I mean, David is a lot like his father in the sense that Joe will readily admit that he's lazy. He works hard, but he's naturally lazy, and David was naturally lazy. And when David had to apply himself, he could, but David liked to be lazy. And so when David had his bar mitzvah, he did not look forward to going to the Hebrew classes and getting his teachings, and it was really a struggle. But the day of his bar mitzvah, and I stayed away from it because I didn't want to pressure him, and I didn't want to nag him, and I figured he'll just do whatever he needs to do. And so he had his bar mitzvah, And he did a fabulous job, and we all took part because his Haftorah portion was quite long, so we decided we'd split it up, and I did a portion, and Joe did a portion, and David did a portion.
Lovely.
And that's how we did it. And we have a picture of David after he did his portion, and he's just sitting there with the cantor, and he is just beaming. And I am just in awe that he was able to do it.
That's lovely. It seemed to have meant something to him. It's interesting, by the way, many young people, many 12-year-olds heading into 13, for them it's just a frightening, awesome job. But it's amazing how the ceremony itself, when they get there, it is transformative. I've seen this so often, that something happens to a human being, a child. They're still children, by the way. You don't become a man, a stupid thing to say. But they feel differently about themselves. So it's lovely to hear that it gave David some sense of real accomplishment. It made him feel good. And for a parent, it's such a wonderful feeling, isn't it?
Oh, it was just, and the theme of the bar mitzvah was a celebration of life.
Oh.
And it was. We had roses, those little potted roses,
Yes.
all on all the tables, so everyone could take it home and plant them. And ours are still growing.
Okay. So you said the second happiest day of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then what happens?
Then he graduates the 6th grade.
At the moment, do you feel he's well?
Yes, we had every indication that he was on the road to recovery and to be cured.
Yes, and that's the key word.
Yes.
He was on the road to being cured.
Right.
This, in your mind, this was not a long remission. He was being cured.
Yes.
And so you begin to relax a little bit?
Yes.
Joe too?
Absolutely.
And then what happens?
And then we decided when he finished 6th grade, he won a principal's award at the middle school, which was just a hoot to see him called up by the principal saying, "Oh, you won the principal's award." And David just had this look of total amazement. And then that summer, he went to a sleepaway camp in Canada, and we got a call from the camp that he was going to come home early. He wasn't feeling well. And so we picked him up at the airport, and I looked, and he had that limp again, that limp that he had in '95. He was holding his hip, and you could see, and I had a sense that something was very wrong. So we took him right to the oncologist, and they did another bone marrow aspiration, and we found out his leukemia not only came back, it was more aggressive. And David, we were all just absolutely devastated, because at that point, at 15, David understood. He knew what the chemo did to him. He knew his bones were very frail. He had severe osteoporosis at that point from the treatment. And he was weak. His body was so weakened by the chemotherapy. So when the doctors told us this, we were just absolutely devastated. And David said, "What did I do wrong? What did I do? Why do I deserve this?" And there's no answer to that.
It's painful for a parent to hear.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And you know there's no answer.
There is no answer.
And he certainly did nothing to deserve it.
No.
And you try to tell him that. Yes?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So what happens next?
Well, the doctor who was caring for David, the one in Guilford, said, "I want you to go to this other facility, and I want you to be evaluated for a bone marrow transplant."
Did that give you hope?
Not at that point, because they took blood samples from us, and none of us were a perfect match. Sarah, at that point it was a perfect match was 7 out of 7. And Sarah was a 6 out of 7. I was a 3 out of 7, and Joe was a 6 out of 7.
And you need 7 out of 7.
Well, to minimize complications, you ideally want a 7 out of 7. I think that the scale has changed since that time. So we went up to this hospital, and the doctor, and we wheeled David into the doctor's office, and she has a whiteboard, and the whiteboard has all the complications on it and the mortality statistics. And she's telling us, you know, this doesn't look good, we're problems with this, and we're going to have problems with that. And as she's talking to us, David's in a wheelchair and has his hands over his ears. And I look at David, and I said, David, do you want to leave the room? And he said, yes. So we take him out of the room, and the doctor keeps telling us that, you know, bone marrow transplant's not going to work, we can't do anything for you. And I just remember she said it to me. It was callous. There was no empathy, no compassion. And so we left.
Isn't that infuriating?
It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And even had the doctor said there was a chance that they could help, I didn't know if I wanted to go to that facility, because if this doctor was talking to us and to David in that tone, how would the rest of the team act? So I said, I don't want to be in this facility. And so then we were on the hunt for another facility. And we had friends at the Weizmann Institute, and we were calling people all over the world trying to find out who's the best doctor. And everywhere I went, they said there were 2 facilities that were the best for David. One was in Tübingen, Germany, and the other was Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. And they said, Rich O'Reilly, he's the guy you want. And so we went to Sloan and had no idea what to expect. And Rich O'Reilly, this incredible man, tall, white hair, big personality. And he comes into the room, and you know, this white jacket, and he looks so official and professional. And he says, David, I see you're wearing a baseball cap. Let's talk baseball. And that's what they did for 45 minutes. And I have to tell you, I had tears in my eyes because he connected to David. And that's where I said, this is where we're going to go for treatment.
At the same time, you understand, both because you're a grown-up and because you're a nurse, that David's probably going to die.
No, I wasn't thinking that way at all.
Oh, what were you thinking?
I have to tell you, the whole time you go through this, we were hopeful until the very end. Seriously. Hope is what keeps you going forward.
Yes.
And so I was always being an optimist. And Rich O'Reilly, I felt and his team were phenomenal. And the nurses were incredible. But they weren't going to do a bone marrow transplant on him. They were going to do a stem cell transplant. And they were going to use a new state-of-the-art transplant technique for people who didn't have a perfect match to minimize the complications. And Sarah was the donor. And I have to tell you, there was a call out to everyone to go on the bone marrow stem cell registry, and you get your blood drawn. And Yeshiva was incredible how everyone came out to support us, but we couldn't find a perfect match. So that's when Sarah was used. So she was hooked up to a machine for 2 days, and she was the first child that they ever did this special, it's called plasmapheresis, and they take out, it's kind of like a dialysis, but they're taking out the stem cells, and the stem cells are the little itty bitty it's the seeds of the immune system. And so they were trying to extract the mature stem cells from the infant stem cells, and they wanted infant stem cells because the adult stem cells would cause complications of graft. Well, that eventually happens, but we were very concerned because there wasn't a perfect match, and they felt that doing this special procedure would make a difference. And so, and it was very anticlimactic the day that they gave him the stem cells, because it just looks like blood, kind of like blood, but it's hanging and it infuses in, and then you're put into strict isolation because his immune system at that point, we had to wipe it out. So.
How's he doing during this period of time? And I don't mean physically, I mean emotionally.
Emotionally, I mean, all his fears were coming true. He was scared of needles, he was scared of doctors, but I have to tell you, that's where Joe and I worked as a team, and we're constantly reassuring him, and we had some friends who would come in and be with him, and so David, and he started using humor to deflect from his fear. That's how he learned to cope. And so he would make jokes here and there, but David was doing okay. As long as Joe and I were doing okay, David did okay.
And you were doing okay?
As best as we could.
In front of him, you were doing okay?
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. You can't afford to break down.
Did you break down when you weren't with him?
There were times. We didn't actively talk about if things would go wrong, but I mean, I think we were acutely aware of what could go wrong, but we just went forward. As a matter of fact, when he had his stem cell transplant, Joe was in the midst at that point. He was working for AIG, and there was a job opportunity for him in London, and with a British company, and I remember saying to the doctor, could we move to London? Is that a possibility? Because going to East, I was going to Yale. Going West, I was going to Sloan. And I just, at that point, I was just in I was just surrounded by medicine, and I wanted to get away from it. And so did David. And the doctor said, if he does well a year after the transplant, yeah, you can go to London. We have colleagues in London. So at that point, Joe, was with David at nighttime. He was staying with him in the nighttime. And then eventually, you realize you can't do your job. And that's when he resigned from AIG. And he started getting involved with this other company, but it wasn't as high pressured. Mm-hmm. And Joe was able to spend time with David.
Robin, are you angry at this time?
No, I wouldn't say I was angry.
Was Joe angry?
I don't know.
But you were not.
You're in a mode that you have to do what you have to do, and you don't have time to think if you're angry or not. And I had another child at home. I had my parents. And at that point, that's when I stopped working. I resigned, and because David needed my undivided attention. And no, I wouldn't say I was angry at that point. I constantly wondered why this was happening, and you start to think about God or spirituality and where this fits into your life. But I have to say, no, I wasn't angry at that point.
And then what happens? After the there is the stem cell transfer.
The
fusion,
transplant, mm-hmm.
Right?
And he's in isolation.
Yes.
And they said he'd be in there for at least a month.
Yes.
And then we started seeing.
Were you able to go inside?
Yes, you had to wash up, and you had a gown
Joe
and
could be
gloves.
inside.
Yes.
Okay.
You just have to be gowned up.
Right.
And
what was his mood?
in the beginning, he was kind of passive, and then after the course of the second week, I would say I started seeing a personality change in him.
In what way?
I noticed he was becoming more confrontational with us, which wasn't in his personality. I noticed he was becoming angry, and I remember talking to the nurses and doctors about it, and I said, something's not right here with David. This is not the David I know. And they said, oh, this is very common in kids who have a transplant and they're in isolation, because not many people would go into the room unless you had to, because it was such a time-consuming job gowning up. And so I had a funny feeling that he had issues with his own mortality. And from nursing school, I remember reading the works of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she's the one who developed the stages of grief. And I remember when I read her books saying that usually a child will not tell a parent their fears of dying because they know the parent's hurting to begin with, and they don't want to compound that. So what happened was I was trying to find someone to talk to him. And there was a psychiatrist, but his technique did not work with David.
What does that mean?
He was using more of a Freudian technique. He was asking David about our relationship, and that wasn't the issue. I had told the doctor that I had a fear that David needed to talk to someone about his own fears of dying, and the doctor wasn't equipped to handle it. I don't know why.
This is the psychiatrist?
This is a child psychiatrist.
Okay, so that doesn't work.
That doesn't work.
What's David's reaction to the child psychiatrist?
He fired him.
David fires him.
He fired him. He says, you're
him.
not helping me.
Good
You're
for him.
fired.
Okay. Then what do you try?
A little Trump. You're fired.
Then what do you try?
I talked to several nurses and other doctors, and no one wants to have the conversation.
They would say no to you? They don't want to go in and talk to him?
They said, no, I can't do that.
Were you surprised?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it that no one was willing to do this. So finally, one of his doctors, who David had a wonderful relationship with, I pulled the doctor aside and I said, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. You were going to go in and talk to David.
And he said?
And I could see he was very reluctant.
He didn't want to do it?
No, he did not want.
But you were sending him in?
I was going to kick him in because it had to be done.
What happens?
He spent 3 hours with David. And 3 hours passed, and he comes out, and he's absolutely exhausted. And he looks, and I said, well, and he says, your son had a lot of questions. And then he walks away because you could see he had it. And so then Joe and I look at each other, and I thought, oh my God, how is David going to be? And we walk into the room, and David's smiling. And it was like this burden had been lifted from him. And what I don't know, to this day, I still don't know the conversation that he had, but whatever it was, he felt better. Mm-hmm. And he was ready to play and do whatever he needed to do. And that's when I was very grateful that David had that conversation, because several months later, he did die.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's just so sad, is it not? It is beyond, there's no words, right? There are no words to lose a child. And all I can say is, I'm really sorry.
Thank you, Mark.
I'm just sorry.
We've talked about this, and I wished I had someone like you.
You're very sweet. So I asked you to talk all about this on L'chaim because while I want people to understand what you went through, what I really want to hear from you, for the audience, is what you learned. And you will carry this burden. This is a personal burden for you and Joe. Nobody can understand it. And you know what, again, I know you personally, and I've heard Joe say many times, people come up to him and say, I know what it must be like. And Joe's at it, you don't know what it's like. Nobody knows.
No one knows. Unless you've been through it, you don't know.
Yes. And it's a personal thing, by the way. Somebody who's been through it has a sense of the loss, but everybody experiences it in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And David had his story, and other people have their story. But I'm asking you to now be on L'chaim because I want you to talk about what you feel you've learned and what you would want, what would you want to say to some of the healthcare professionals you encountered along the way, good and bad. And then most of all, I want you to talk what you've learned for you that might be helpful to other people. And I want to begin by asking you a specific question. You mentioned that David began deflecting with humor.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that for a moment. How important do you feel humor is in this entire process?
If you want to see the essence of what humanity is, you go to a children's outpatient pediatric clinic. And when we were there, you saw children laughing. And you see parents laughing. Because that's how, as I said, hope is the core of how you get through something like this. And I remember in the clinic at Sloan Kettering, all the parents, we were a unit, and we were watching each other's child. Someone would take a break or go for a walk, so everyone was taking a role in everyone. And kindness, it was just incredible. But David and Joe, just when they spent time together, they just started making jokes. And I have to be really honest, it went over my head. I mean, there were times I'd hear them laughing and I'd sit and listen to what they were talking about, and I had no idea what they were laughing over. It was just another degree. I mean, I just wasn't for me. I didn't understand their humor. But then there were other stories in which, and Joe has the art of telling the stories, but David just would make fun. That's how he took control over the cancer. That was the only way he had control, was through humor. So he would take control of the situation by making fun of the cancer. And you'll see that with a lot of cancer patients. They'll make fun of the cancer, and it's all a matter of control. Mm-hmm. And every time David would crack a joke, I mean, Joe would egg him on, and then the two of them would just, and anyone who came into the room didn't understand why we were laughing, but it's called gallows humor. And, but I later, after David died, and just a few years ago, I started reading the work of Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning. And when he was in Auschwitz, he would talk about how he would, in order to stay alive, in order to go forward, he had to find humor in something that happened that day. And I just remember when I read that, I took the book and I just highlighted it, and because I knew that was going to come in. That just spoke to me.
What's interesting is somebody might think it was irreverent to be laughing. You're saying on the contrary. In some way, it's the way in which not just the parent, but the child.
Well, it all has to be, the child has to
Yes.
start it. I mean, you can't make a
Right.
joke
Right.
just out of thin air.
But if a child makes a joke, it's okay for the parent to embrace it.
Oh, absolutely. And it's something very sacred between the parent and the
Yes.
child.
Yes.
And if you're an outsider coming in, unless David would go to
Yes,
that person
yes.
and say to them and make a joke, then you were in on the joke.
Yes.
Otherwise, I wouldn't recommend
Yes.
it.
Yes. Did David ever become very frightened at the end?
He might have. I know Joe was spending nights with David at the hospital. And to Joe, that was the scariest time of the day because there aren't many people on the shift. And it just seems that everything goes wrong at nighttime. And David was having, at that point, David was having what was called complications called graft versus host disease. And that meant that Sarah's stem cells realized they were not in the right body and they were attacking his body. And it manifested itself with a rash. And David was supposed to get his Boviac taken out, and the doctor noticed just before he took it out, because he was doing so well, they noticed a rash on his neck. And they said, oh, I think we need to keep this in. And then it turned out it kept spreading and spreading. And after time, they got more aggressive with his treatment. And unfortunately, that's when he was totally immunocompromised, and he developed a fungal infection, Aspergillus, and that's what took his life.
I see. As you reflect now about how you were treated by the medical profession, by the doctors and other people who were giving you health care, you've already mentioned a couple of situations. But in general, is there, out of your experience, do you have anything you'd want parents to understand? Or if there are people in the medical profession watching right now, we have doctors watching right now, we have nurses watching right now, what would you like them to hear and understand that they might not intuitively understand? The idea that this doctor was scared to go in and talk to your son. And by the way, doctors are just human beings too. But he had a responsibility at that point to help your son. That was his job. And he's a grown-up and your son is a child.
But the problem is in healthcare, the focus is on cure.
Not
what happens if you're dying.
That's not good. You know, you and I have talked about this off camera. End of life issues. And what you just said is so profound. It's as if the medical profession will do everything it can as long as it thinks it can help you. It doesn't know what to do if it turns out they can't help you.
Well, there are a lot of contributing factors to that. A lot of that is, number one, a lot of the people in healthcare field don't really know how to approach the subject, and there are ways to approach it. But my number one advice to healthcare professionals, especially towards the end of life, is be very aware of your body language. When David was in the intensive care unit, there were many times the doctors and nurses would be at this nursing station, which was right where his bed was. And I mean, one night, David's lungs were filling up with fluid, and Joe was sitting there, and he kept saying, call the team in, let's get a chest x-ray. So he didn't do it during the night. So that morning, they did a chest x-ray, and right in front of us, they weren't aware of it, that we could see, they went, and then I found that nurses and doctors, especially as a patient is dying, especially a child, they don't look at you. They avoid looking at you because they don't want to give anything away. And you feel totally alone in that moment. And that's when I got scared. That's when I got really scared.
It's interesting. They were telling you without telling you.
Body language is everything.
Everything. And also, it is important for doctors not to talk right outside the door. We hear everything. It's just, the antennae are up. Sometimes there's real, no, they don't mean ill. They just, I'm sorry, it's stupid. And nobody has taught them. So I hope if anybody's watching, they're hearing what you're saying. And the point about not looking at you doesn't help you.
No. You feel isolated.
Yes.
Totally isolated.
And it is. You do no good by pretending you're going to avoid the issue and you won't look.
What finally happened was towards the end, the last 2-3 days of his life, David's kidneys were failing, so he was building up a lot of fluid in his body, and his face got all distorted. They had to intubate him because he wasn't getting enough oxygen, and so he was on that, and then he was having some irregular heartbeats. So I finally went to the doctor. There was a really nice doctor, and I went to him and I said, I need you, because no one was talking to me. I said, I need you to tell me when we're at the point of no return. I said, if David survives this, what's going to happen? What's going to be his quality of life? And he said, well, he's going to need a lung transplant. His lungs are bleeding, so he's going to need a total lung transplant. And then he said he'll probably need a kidney transplant too. And that's when Joe and I talked it over, and I said, this is not the quality of life I want for David. So we set the parameters of we signed a DNR. And I don't think David would want to live like that. That means for the rest of his life, he'd be at the mercy of healthcare professionals. And he would never have a normal life. And he died a few hours later.
You take him off the machine?
No, he died.
He died on the machine?
His heart stopped.
This is going to sound, in some way, it's going to sound crazy, but was there any sense of relief that your son did not have to deal with this any longer?
I wouldn't say that. I think up until his heart stopping, I really thought he was going to survive.
Even after the doctor told you he was going to need a lung transplant and a kidney transplant?
You can play games in your head.
Okay. I
cope.
accept it. No, people should understand if that's what you feel, that's what you feel. And I understand that. I would want also, for somebody I love, I would want every chance. And at some point, though, I don't want somebody to have no quality of life. And it seems to me when you love someone, you wouldn't want them to be in a certain kind of vegetative state.
And well, they said he'd never get off the respirator, and so.
So I asked you before, were you angry? You said I didn't have time to be angry. After David passes, are you angry?
No, I wasn't angry. I was in shock. And then Rich O'Reilly came over. And I remember sitting in a conference room with him. And I mean, people might not believe it, but I was sitting there and I felt this air go through me. And I said, right in front of Joe and Rich O'Reilly, I said, David just went right through me. And I felt his presence. And I just felt I felt a relief. Mm-hmm. Yes, I did feel a relief. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't thinking that way at that point. Mm-hmm. But he had gone through so much. I mean, sometimes Joe and I, to this day, it's been almost 20 years, and we sit and we think about what we went through, and especially those last few months, and it was horrendous. Horrendous.
I didn't ask you, did you cry all the time?
No, I don't think I cried. There was too much to be done.
Did you ever cry?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Between the Shiva and then we decided, I remember, each day, of course, you're crying all the time. And then one day I decided to go out food shopping. And as I'm food shopping, and for one moment I forgot. And I remember standing there and someone came up to me and said, "How's David?" And then you feel a crash. And that was happening all the time. I mean, we live in a small community. Our family is well known. My parents live here and my brother. And I realized I couldn't stay home. I had to get away. There were too many reminders. I wanted to heal on my own terms. So Joe had this new job, and I said, I think this is what we're going to do. We're going to still move.
Good for you.
Well, some people did not agree with that.
Good for you.
But that's what Joe and I felt we needed to do, and we needed to do it for Sarah. Because Sarah had lived in the shadow of David's illness since she was 5.
Oh, your parents lived in Stanford?
They lived in Greenwich at that point.
Lived in Greenwich, but lived in the area?
Yep.
And Joe has a mother?
Yep, she lives in Israel.
Okay. I didn't ask you, it didn't occur to me, but it's hard on grandparents too, but in a very different way than parents. Did the grandparents make it harder for you or easier for you? Or neither?
Neither.
Okay. They didn't create a problem?
No.
And they couldn't help you?
Right.
Okay. So I said to you again, were you angry? I don't hear anger. Were you ever angry at God? You said before, you mentioned the spiritual. So I'm just curious whether in any way this entire experience either changed or, did it change in any way? Anything about your sense of the God of this universe?
I had more spiritual revelations than religious revelations.
Meaning what?
I had another experience. Sarah's birthday was 3.5 weeks after David died. And we didn't know what to do for her birthday. So the president of Joe's company had an apartment in London, and he said, why don't you go to London and look at homes and start preparing for a move. So we stayed in his apartment, and it was so quiet, and it was so peaceful. And there was no phone calls, no television. I slept the deepest I had slept in 5 years. And one night, third night, I woke up at 3 in the morning, and I had a dream. And David called me on the telephone. And David says, Mom, it's me. And I said, David, how are you? I love you. I miss you. Where are you? Trying to. He says, Mom, I can only talk for a second. And finally I calmed down and I said, what is it? He says, Sarah's going to be okay. And then he hangs up the phone. And I wake up hysterical. And I said to Joe, David talked to me. And because I was really concerned for Sarah. David was her best friend. There was a 6-year difference between them. He was very protective over her. They had a love-hate relationship. And here we were going to take her out of her school. This is 5th grade, the grade that David got sick. We were going to take her out of school and move her to London and start a new school and new friends. And how much can a child go through? But she was unbelievable. And I was crying all the time at that point, and she was consoling me. And she never broke down in front of me. And to this day, I wonder how she has processed it all. And I don't know.
Have you ever talked to her about it?
We've talked about it, but I'm doing a lot of reading now, and so there's some questions I'm going to ask her.
Was David right? Is your daughter okay?
She's more than okay. She is unbelievable. She's in the healthcare field. She works at Sloan Kettering part-time, as an occupational therapist, helping, primarily working with women who are recovering after a mastectomy.
Isn't that wonderful?
And,
Isn't that wonderful?
and she's going to be taking a lymphedema course in the next week or so. And so she is, and then she's working at the Jewish Home in Bridgeport. And so between the two jobs, she has created a beautiful life for herself.
Aren't you proud of her?
Oh, I'm more than proud. I mean,
Yes.
considering where she was when we
Yes.
moved to London and where she is today, she's a remarkable young woman.
I am not looking for a facile answer. I'm looking for as profound an answer as you can give me. Robin, how does a parent go on after losing a child like you lost your child?
I think there are a lot of, you go through a lot of thoughts. And I have to be honest, there were many times where I thought of suicide. And many parents do think of it. But I had a husband and I had a daughter. If Sarah weren't there, I don't know. But I felt I owed it to Sarah that I had to give her a good life. And I wanted her to get the attention from us that she hadn't gotten because of David's illness. And, but as a parent, you are absolutely devastated and you go forward. There are times you have to take it minute to minute, hour to hour, and there are times then I mean, the first several months, it's like a wave, a big wave, and it crashes down, and then it builds up again, and then it crashes down, and you find yourself crying just for no reason. Joe has admitted that many times he would go to work and just be in a daze and cry. He'd see a father with a son, and to this day it still hurts and it's painful. I think it's just a matter that you just have to go day to day, day to day. And there are some days you find as time goes by, it gets a little bit easier. And then, you know, some people say it takes 6 weeks. Some people say it takes a year. For us, it really was a 5-year journey. And to really make sense out of it all and to do something purposeful in his honor, in his memory, that took at least 5 years.
And then you did.
And then I did. When we moved to London, the first 2 years I spent in grief counseling and did a lot of walking. We had 3 dogs, and we walked the Hampstead Heath. And I found solitude was the way to heal. And I didn't want to share it with anybody. I mean, if I wanted to share it, I would share it. But I wanted to choose who I shared it with on my own terms, because it's a very exhausting process to rehash all those memories. And also you've got to remember there's a lot of guilt you're still processing.
What's the guilt?
Did I do the right thing? I mean, I knew in my heart we did everything possible, but you still think, what if? But a turning point for me was I got involved with an organization in London called the Teenage Cancer Trust. I read in Hello magazine about the Duchess of York. Sarah Ferguson was a patron of this organization, as was Roger Daltrey, and how they built inpatient cancer units for teenagers. And I thought, wow, that really is, we have nothing like that in the US. So it took a while, but I finally was able to get in touch with them, and I told them I'd like to volunteer and get involved. And the Brits don't know much about volunteers. Well, I think they've changed since they met me because Americans are extremely giving of their time. And so when I said I wanted to volunteer, that was a new concept for them. But I got involved. We met monthly, and I met a nurse counselor. And she counseled teenagers who were dying. And there were several BBC documentaries done on this, on teenagers, 16, 17 years old, who've relapsed several times, and they don't want to go on. And the parents want to do everything, and the kid said, I've had enough. And so this woman would go in and counsel the families. So she and I just developed a phenomenal rapport, and finally they said, we would like you both to present an international conference on adolescent oncology. And so she and I accepted, and we did a presentation on the parents' perspective of adolescent cancer. And I talked primarily as a mother, but also very aware of the nursing role. And the nurse who I worked with, she was going to present suggestions and how to improve care. And I have to tell you, Mark, it was so empowering. I was in an amphitheater, and there are like 700 people, healthcare professionals, mostly doctors, famous oncologists from all over the world. And I was euphoric. I felt, oh, I have a voice. I have a voice as a mother and as a nurse. This is what I'm going to do. And that was a turning point for me. And that's when I realized what this nurse did for me, because in our presentation, it took us many months to prepare for it. But I realized that our discussions helped me, because we would talk about universal themes that what she saw in her practice and what I went through, the guilt, the anguish, how it affects marriage, how it affects your friends, how it affects your family. And she made me feel, because I really thought I was all by myself. And she said, Robin, what you're explaining, everyone goes through. And I said, why didn't I have this? Why didn't I have a nurse like this in the United States? And that's when I realized, and I wrote to Rich O'Reilly, and eventually our speech was published into a book. And I sent him the book, and I said, one day it's going to be the nurse who has these conversations, not necessarily the doctor. And he laughed at me. He said, oh, Robin, you're being a silly. And I said, no, it's going to happen. And I have to tell you, it's happening. So finally, around 2003, I'm still in London, and I went back to school in the 90s. I went back to Fairfield University, and Fairfield University called me up, and they said, oh, we would love you to serve on our nursing advisory board. And I had no idea what was entailed, but I said, sure, I'll do it. I come to Connecticut frequently. My mom was ill at that point, so I was commuting every 6 weeks back and forth. And so whenever they had a meeting, it was scheduled around my itinerary. And so I went to Fairfield, and we talked about what was needed in the nursing school. And at that point, everyone universally said, we need a doctorate in nursing practice. That's what we have to do. So we all stood behind it, and Fairfield has a phenomenal doctorate in nursing practice program right now. And that's when I met a faculty member at Fairfield University. She was a pediatric nurse, and she really had a real sensitivity towards pediatric oncology. And we were trying to get funding to start a program on the needs of teenagers going through cancer treatment. And there was nothing being published at that point. And so we worked on a grant for Lance Armstrong Foundation, and we submitted it, and they said, we love the idea, but you have no research to back this up. So that was one of my lessons, that whatever I do from now on, research has to be involved. So I said, you know what? I would like to start Fairfield to integrate pediatric palliative care into their curriculum. And so they did, because on the nursing boards, they were starting to ask questions about palliative care and about the needs of patients going through cancer treatment.
And for our audience, define palliative care.
Palliative care is a relatively new discipline in medicine in which looks at the whole patient who's undergoing curative treatment but needs the support of a team to help them through the process. So anyone with a serious illness, and that could be cancer, that could be lung disease, kidney disease, heart disease, Alzheimer's, cystic fibrosis, multiple sclerosis, anything that could be life-threatening, but you're going through curative treatment. You don't know where it's going to take you, but it will provide you symptom relief, pain relief, spiritual support, psychological support, and social support. And so I thought, she said, I think this is what you need to learn about. And that was my aha moment.
Yes.
When I realized this is what I need to focus on.
That's wonderful. As we meet, you're in the midst of writing a book.
Yes.
What's the book?
Don't know the title yet.
Doesn't matter.
But it's going to be talking about what we've been through, what our family went through. I don't want it to be a sad story. I want it to honor David, and David wouldn't want it sad. I want to talk about how humor played an important role in our healing and still does, and the fact that palliative care is so crucial and so important. It gives you a sense of hope and support, whereas hospice is dealing with the last 6 months of your life, and there is no curative treatment at that point. But it's giving you a layer of support, and I think especially with telemedicine, which is the new thing right now, that you'll be able to contact your doctor and nurse or therapist or a social worker, anyone, through a telephone call, and they will come and visit you or talk to you, and you're not alone.
Robin, is David still with you?
Always, always. Every time I do a project in his memory, and I know I'm on the right track, my hairs go up on my neck. And so whenever I'm doing something, and it's happened many times, the faculty member at Fairfield University, I would tell her, oh, I just got goosebumps. And I always feel he's with me. Joe has to go to the cemetery all the time. I don't go to the cemetery. That's where his body is. David is in my heart. And he is the purpose why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's given me a sense of purpose and a sense of honoring him so he can live on.
You know I adore you.
Oh, I adore you too.
You are so special, and this was courageous of you and a gift. You did a gift for all of us.
Oh.
And I can't thank you enough. And I know David is with you every day, and I know he's with Joe every day. And I hope you understand what a tremendous contribution you're making in so many, many ways. And we've talked now about David. The next time you're here, I want to talk about some of the other issues you're involved with. And I want to talk more about palliative care, which I think is being, the fact that you describe it so beautifully and it's not being done routinely is a shame, and we have to change that.
Oh, I think it will change.
But I just want you to understand, you are extraordinary. And I wish you kol tuv v'atzlacha for you, your husband, your daughter, your whole family. And I hope you come many times and sit in this chair.
I will come anytime you ask me, Mark.
Thank you, darling. Thank you.
Thank you.
The thoughts of Robin Kanarek, president of the Kanarek Family Foundation, which is responsible for the Kanarek Center for Palliative Care, Nursing Education at Fairfield University. If any of you want to be in touch with Robin, you can email me, and I will forward your emails on to her. You have a sense of who she is, and I hope nobody watching right now has any reason personally to reach her. At the same time, many of us are dealing with all kinds of family problems and illness. There's no one better for you to communicate with than Robin. So if you email me, I will forward your emails on to her. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'chaim. Please email me, write me, post it on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And remember, you can now listen to the L'chaim podcast. You can take L'chaim wherever you go. L'chaim's on iTunes or Google Play. However you listen to podcasts, you can now listen to L'chaim. So I hope if any of you want to listen when you're in the car or wherever you're going or at night, you just flip it on and let the L'chaim podcast becomes part of your life. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.